September is commemorated as International Month for Deaf People, raising awareness of their rights worldwide. And the month is also used to highlight the difficulties experienced by the deaf community and the hearing impaired. And it aims to promote their inclusivity in a wider society. For more on this, we're joined by Joyce Maluleke, Director General in the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. Happy Heritage Day to you, Joyce, and thank you so much for joining us. How then is this month, or rather the significance of Deaf Month being observed, particularly if you're competing with other events such as Heritage Day, etc.?
I think all of them speak to each other because our heritage is about us, it's about our communications, it's about our linguistics, about culture, about all those. So they talk to each other and they feed into each other.
Okay, and how's the day been observed, and especially in celebration of the sign language being adopted as an official South African language and with much more inclusivity, and yet there's still quite a lot to be done?
There's a lot to be done because South Africans do not know the language. I know we don't have enough time, but I would like to share with you that I was invited to a school of the deaf. They sang and they had a play that they did, and I couldn't hear anything of what they were doing. And they showed me that this is what we do to them when we communicate without sign language interpreters. We exclude them in whatever that we do. So that is the challenge that we have. So today, as we celebrate the Deaf International Day, as we celebrate heritage and all those things, we must remember that heritage is about who we are, it's about the language, it's about social cohesion and nation building, and all those, they all talk to each other.
So what is your department doing to ensure that the rights of the hearing impaired or deaf community is not compromised, especially when it comes to access to information on a daily basis beyond the calendar event as we are marking today?
We are working together with PENSA, Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, Department of Justice, which was responsible for the amendment of the Constitution to ensure that we develop guidelines and work with institutions that will be training South Africans. Every South African must be able to communicate in sign language, but not only that, every service point must be able to communicate with the deaf when they come for services, so that they can be able to give them proper services.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the recent SASSA debacle where especially the elderly and people with disabilities had to wait on endless queues in rural areas for their payment. Joyce, in terms of ensuring that, number one, this is prevented, and secondly, that the inconvenience is minimized as best as possible should this kind of situation occur as well. I'm referring to the accessibility of services for people with disabilities, including the deaf community. How would you rate it in this country?
There are lots of challenges. We will remember that when our constitution started, our constitution, in terms of Section 6, guaranteed the rights of persons to their linguistic, I think Section 6 and Section 6 of the Constitution and Section 30, but the sign language was not included. So the problem started from there. So this is us making the wrong rights to ensure that they are included in communication, and also not that they are included, that it's their constitutional right for them to be able to communicate and for us to communicate with them in the way they want us to communicate with them.
Is the right approach, Joyce, again, to print all government communique in all 11 languages and then in Braille? Or rather, to print, I don't know how you're going to communicate government services if you're saying that it is the prerogative of your department and government in general and society. How then are you going to effectively communicate without necessarily putting a strain on your resources or budgets?
It's not the prerogative of government. It has to communicate with everyone whom they communicate. If they print in Xitsonga, government must also print in all 12 languages. But as you know, that we have challenges with the resources. That's why government had said at least 5 languages and Braille. now with sign language, I think government will have to come up with a way. PENSAP will have to assist us to be able to communicate with the deaf communities.
Yeah, and I guess
it's a constitutional right.
Yes, ma'am. And the low-hanging fruit would be the integration of pupils with hearing impairment in your general school or mainstream schooling system, as opposed to necessarily developing specialized schools. How far are we with that kind of intervention?
The Department of Basic Education has already started educating sign language at schools. It's teaching, so it's already integrated at schools. There are teachers who are able to teach sign language. So that one, I think, it's an advantage. So now what PENSALP and the national government school, the National School of Government, what they're doing is to ensure that public servants are also educated, because whether you go to local government or you go to the police or you go to the clinic or wherever, you must be able to communicate with whoever with your own language. So that means even deaf people must be able to communicate in their sign language, and somebody must be able to hear them and give them the service that they need.
Yeah, you mentioned the challenges that still remain, and we are closely edging towards the, I think it's the National Development Plan 2030. In terms of your strategic development program and the measurement there of Joyce. Looking at that, it's almost 10 years since the passing of the National Development Plan. How would you then say you are dealing with the issue of bridging the divide, making sure that there's access to information, nobody is excluded, especially those that are impoverished?
We are trying our level best, even though it depends on what you're talking about. For example, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development now has been printing the Constitution, 25 years of the Constitution. They've been printing it and ensuring that everybody has access to it. But I think what maybe I need to say is that having access to a physical Constitution and having access to the rights in the Constitution are two different things. That needs a day to debate that.
No, totally understood, Mayor Joyce. And going forward, the kind of milestones that you've set for your department in particular, and I appreciate that you've extended your interpretation or giving us feedback in terms of what government is doing, but your milestones and your own strategic development goals within the department in itself. What is it that you feel ought to have been done differently, and what is it that you are committing for 2024?
Starting now in 2023, what we have done, we are planning a workshop for all service providers so that we can work together to come up with a 5-year plan in terms of what needs to happen in order to ensure that deaf persons are integrated fully in the entire government. So as the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities will also develop an M&E a framework to be able to monitor that framework, because we are not an implementing department, but we have to monitor and ensure that all other departments comply to what they are doing. But also we've agreed with the Department of Public Service and Administration that they have to host a workshop in November during the Disability Month, where they're going to develop a strategy in terms of employment of persons with disabilities in government, because apparently government is supposed to have been appointing, or it's supposed to have appointed 2% persons with disabilities, but it's at 1.54. So that includes the deaf and everybody else. So that's what we're working on.
Okay, and just lastly, before we let you go, your message as we mark Heritage Day and the Heritage Month, particularly to the hearing impaired communities, people with disabilities, women and youth who end up carrying the brunt of the burden of the triple challenges in the country.
What I want to say is that it's their constitutional right to be served in their language that they want to be served with. So they need to insist when they get to a service point, whether it's government or private sector, because the Constitution is binding to both government and private sector. It applies horizontally and vertically. So when you go into a bank, the bank must service you according to the way you need to be serviced. So they must insist. But the challenge that we have is that there are different sign languages. That is the challenge that we have. So we need to ensure that it is aligned so that people are able to service people who need to communicate in sign language. Thank you very much. But I believe that everyone is equal despite your disability or your capability. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. That's Ms. Joyce Maluleke from the Department of Women, Youth, People with Disabilities, talking to us about the September, also commemorating Deaf Awareness Month around the world and highlighting challenges around the inclusivity of society when it comes to those who are differently abled.